member for Bravanchy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And it's nice to rise in this House and speak to an issue. A bill comes to us from our colleagues in the Senate where there's general agreement amongst the parties that there needs to be action taken on this issue. Although listening to some of the speeches earlier today, it doesn't sound as though there's going to be unanimous support in this House for this bill, but I think enough to get it across the finish line. I'm a father of 3, the grandfather of 10 children, some of whom may even be watching today, and the issues related to children are very important to me today, as I think they are to all of us in this House. And I'm pleased to have the opportunity to share my thoughts on this bill that our friends in the Senate have put before us. So I want to thank Senator Maville-Deschênes for presenting this bill, as well as Bill S-211, which I'm also very strongly in favor of, which is a bill that calls for age verification methods be implemented to protect children from online pornography, another type of exploitation. It passed the Senate last week, and I hope we'll be seeing it and debating it in this House very soon, Madam Speaker. UNICEF, in their 2021 report, showed the number of children involved in child labor had risen to 160 million worldwide, an increase of 8.4 million over the preceding 4 years, the first significant increase in this generation. The most significant jump was kids, age 5 to 11, and the number of children doing hazardous, dangerous work rose from 6.5 million to 79 million between 2016 and 2020. Again, those numbers are from UNICEF. And you know what, Madam Speaker, we know who the culprits are. We know which corporate entities are utilizing child labor, and we know about the children in the Congo getting sent down the mines to bring up the cobalt so that we here in Canada can have the latest device or drive an electric car. But it goes even deeper than that, with many layers to consider. Canadians are great people. We're kind, we're generous, compassionate. And you can ask any Canadian if they think that child or forced labor is a bad thing. Every one of them would say yes. Ask them, should the Government of Canada do something about it? Yes, we must. Should we ban products produced with forced labor or child labor? Absolutely. Well, good. Now what are you willing to give up in order for that to happen? Now, I realize that it's hardly that simple, but really, Madam Speaker, that is the question. And to be honest, most Canadians would be shocked to discover what products we use and enjoy on a daily basis that in fact contribute to robbing children of their freedoms. While I may not always see eye to eye with my colleague from Vancouver East, I would like to reference some stats from her speech back in March. According to a 2016 report from World Vision, it's estimated that 1,200 companies operating in Canada are importing over $34 billion worth of goods produced by child or forced labor every single year. And that's in Canada, right here, Madam Speaker. I serve a rural riding. I'm an agriculture kind of guy. Canada's farmers are the best in the world. But internationally, the agriculture and grocery industry are one of the most worst offenders for forced labor and child labor. 71% of all child labor takes place in the agriculture sector, and many of these items end up on Canadian grocery store shelves. In 2019, more than $3.7 billion worth of these food products were imported into Canada, a 63% increase from 10 years ago. I look at that number and I think about the fact that as Canadians, we waste somewhere around 58% of the food that we produce here in Canada. And according to research done by a Toronto-based Second Harvest, some 4.8 million tons of food is lost or wasted during processing and manufacturing, and some 2.38 million tons is lost at the consumer level. In short, the abundance of food that we produce here in Canada has led us to dismiss its intrinsic value, and we actually waste more than we consume. In a world struggling to feed itself, in a country where 1 of 5 families is struggling to feed themselves, it's hard to fathom those numbers. And then we turn around and we turn a blind eye and import billions of dollars of food from countries and companies where we know it's kids slaving to produce it. It's mind-boggling. It's so wrong. So I'm glad we're having this conversation. I'm glad we have this bill, and there are positive aspects of this legislation. I just wish this bill had more teeth. The legislation is great in principle, but there are still some problems with this bill, and given that this will likely be the last chance we have to address these issues, I'm going to raise a few of them here. First of all, the bill does not prescribe what specific measures a company must take to be in compliance. Yes, it includes general guidance as to what information should be provided, but it is in the reporting entities themselves who will retain discretion over the design and implementation of compliance systems. The Canadian Network for Corporate Accountability, which includes such members as Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch Canada, puts it more bluntly. Bill S-211 would only apply to a small minority of companies. It does not require that these companies stop using child or forced labor to conduct human rights due diligence. Now, if that's the case, or even if we're just leaving it up to the individual companies to police themselves, individual companies that in some cases are the very reason for this type of legislation, and it is necessary and it's being brought forward, then this legislation may really not have the teeth that we all want it to have. I think this is a situation where it's appropriate for the government to give specific and binding measures and standards to remediate forced labor or child labor in order to be in compliance, because otherwise, this is what I see happening. We will pass this bill, and let's pick a corporation, we'll call it the Orange Company. For years, Orange has used child labor to source their material and build their products. Now this legislation comes into effect, and Orange Company needs to send its report to the minister's office. So they look at the guidelines, they create their own reporting system, they prepare a report. Who needs to approve the report? Well, we look at Part 2, subsection 4A of this bill, and who is it? Well, it's the entity's governing body. What other verification is required? A signature, one signature. Subsection 5B, the signature of one or more members of a governing body. That's it. Without me needing to stretch out this illustration, we can foresee how this does not provide sufficient accountability. Not only that, but the systemic concerns run deep, far deeper than what I have time to discuss here. Let me affirm the efforts identifying in Part 2, subsection 12.1, the minister's prerogative of asking for a revised report in the event of skepticism. I can imagine how this step would force companies to dig deeper and divulge more. However, the consequence for non-compliance is only a fine, really a small fine comparably speaking to the revenue that many of these companies will actually generate. I recognize this legislation as a starting point, and you do need to start somewhere. But like so many other topics, this requires a much broader national conversation, a broader conversation that considers all different layers, including those of the victims. We can slap on Band-Aids, promise the world, and then pat ourselves on the back, but real change always comes with a cost that probably infringe on some of the many treasured items that we use daily. That's true of the economy, and that's true of our society. Author Rosie Donan writes, "Change always comes with a closing cost, but it's still worth trying. Not because the odds are particularly good, mind you, but considering the alternative. There's value in the struggle, value in touching the raw and the bloody parts of our souls, opening them up to the sunlight and hoping they will heal." As parliamentarians, we have the ability to pass a child and forced labor law that has teeth. We have the ability to ensure that no product made with forced or child labor enters Canada. We can levy severe financial or criminal penalties on those entities who used forced labor who do or want to do business here in Canada. We can do all that, Madam Speaker. The question is, as Canadians, is that really something that we are willing to do? Thank you, Madam.